Today is study 9 in our series Defining Words, where we've been focusing on the key words that are often used in our church, emphasizing some of the core values. The church is the hope of the world. The greatest in the kingdom of God is a servant. You never know who you are until you know whose you are. Belonging comes before believing. Grace is really amazing. We are called to be people with an attitude of gratitude, and some others too. Today I want to share a saying that has been used many times over many years. It's a challenge that has encouraged us to trust and obey Jesus and to be daring and courageous followers of Christ. The saying is not unique to Tamworth Elim Church. In fact, it's been borrowed from an American pastor and author named John Ortberg, who wrote an entire book on this saying some years back. The book, published in 2001. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. Referring to the occasion when Peter, in the middle of the night, walked on water at Jesus' command. Those words have challenged us as a church over the years. But to tell you the truth, the spiritual principle found in those words was practiced by our church long before the book was written. One of our former church elders, Tim, often said, "We've got out of the boat so many times here at Tamworth Elim that we've got webbed feet." And he's probably right. So let's jump in, excuse the pun, to the passage in Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. Immediately, that is, immediately following the occasion when Jesus fed 5,000 men plus women plus children on 2 fish and 5 loaves, which is the account that immediately precedes the one that we're looking at today in the Gospels of Matthew and in Mark. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get out of the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed them. After he had dismissed them, he went up onto a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Notice that the disciples entered into the boat at Jesus' command, yet still encountered the storm. The lesson is here that obedience and living in the will of God is no guarantee that you'll be spared adversity. Often the storms come when we are doing exactly what Jesus told us to do, when we are obedient to his call. We're not spared hardship or difficulty just because we belong to Jesus. There are times when we suffer hardship because we are followers of Jesus. Verse 25. Shortly before dawn, the actual translation is the 4th watch of the night. Now, according to Roman reckoning, the night was divided into 4 parts, or 4 watches. 6 to 9 p.m, 9 till midnight, midnight till 3 a.m, and 3 to 6 a.m. So the time that we are talking about here is the time between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m, the 4th watch of the night. Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. Notice that again. Jesus turns up when he's least expected, frequently in the storms of life. And as much as we detest those storms, our extremity can often be God's opportunity. Verse 27. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Well, I think that Peter provides us with some very good advice here when he asks, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on water." It's so important to discern between faith and foolishness. And over the years, our leaders at Tamworth Elim Church have tried to discern between good ideas and God ideas. All God ideas are good, but not all good ideas are from God. And Peter says, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you." On many occasions, we have needed to say those same words. "Lord, if that is you." We said that when we ventured out on setting up a day nursery in our building. We said that in 1996, when, as a church of just 60 people, we purchased 5 derelict houses in order to convert them into a special needs house and a community hub for our church and charity. We said it when we employed a youth pastor before we had any youth. We said those words when we embarked on a massive 4-phase extension some 20 years ago, costing in the region of £800,000. We needed to get this right. We needed to discern between faith and foolishness. "Lord, if that's you." We asked that question, "Lord, is that you?" on many occasions before setting up projects like Food Bank and others. Lord, we need to know your heart here. We need to discern your will. When Dan applied to become an assistant pastor some 8 years ago, our elders needed to ask, "Lord, if that is you." I say elders as I chose not to be a part of that decision, being Dan's my son-in-law. It was 3 a.m. and the disciples, these experienced fishermen, had been fighting a major storm and were exhausted as they fought against the element of the winds and the waves. Courage by itself was not enough, and Peter, for once, had decided not to be spontaneous or reckless. Peter, as we know, had a bit of a reputation for being impulsive. Remember all those other occasions, such as when Jesus was transfigured and Moses and Elijah, representing the law and the prophets from the Old Testament, appeared. And Peter, typical Peter, asked if he should build some shelters for all of them. The gospel writers add, rather humorously, that Peter said this because he didn't know what else to say. Don't you love this guy? Then there was the occasion when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. Peter, impulsive Peter, picked up a sword and lopped off the ear of the high priest's servant Malchus, only for Jesus to superglue it back on again. He didn't use superglue, by the way. Remember the conversation between Jesus and the disciples at Caesarea Philippi. Jesus asked, "Who do people say that I am?" "Some say that you're Elijah, John the Baptist, one of the prophets. But what about you?" "Well, you are the Christ, the Son of God," answered Peter. Jesus then commended Peter, and we are told that Jesus said to him that he had received this revelation from God himself. Jesus immediately told his disciples of his approaching crucifixion, to which then Peter responded, "Never, Lord," and got a stern rebuke from Jesus, who told him that on this occasion he didn't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Peter had a serious problem of foot and mouth disease, always opening his mouth, putting his foot in it. Peter was impulsive, and on times he was reckless. Sometimes he got it right, some things he got very wrong. He often put his mouth into action before his brain was in gear, but not this time. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." On this occasion, Peter needed to know whether Jesus thought this was actually a good idea, and Jesus did. "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Can you imagine that? Now, these words have become so familiar to us that I think that they've lost that sense of what this moment must have been like. If it had been 3 in the afternoon and the lake perfectly still and the sun shining, it would have been one thing. But 3 in the morning, and these guys had been fighting the storm for hours. What would that moment have been like? Our youngest, Andrew, when he was at university, he joined a skydiving club. And I remember talking to him about jumping out of an aeroplane for the first time. I was both intrigued and feeling quite nauseous at the idea, as I have a fear of heights. But once you've left the plane, there's no way back. That's it. But at least with skydiving, you have a pretty good chance that the parachute is going to open. Getting out of the boat to walk on water in a major storm in the middle of the night, I think is another matter altogether. However, Matthew tells us that Peter walked on water and came towards Jesus. Catch that. He walked on water. Sometimes we can be a little bit hard on Peter and criticize him for sinking and miss what Matthew actually tells us in his gospel. He walked on water before he saw the wind. The wind is invisible, and Matthew probably meant that before he saw what the wind was doing to the water. For Peter to see this, he must have really taken his eyes off Jesus, both physically and spiritually. And there's a great lesson there. He began to sink only when he took his eyes off Jesus. Verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Another great lesson there, that Jesus is only ever an arm's length away. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." That's the story. But let's come back to our defining phrase. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. Which are you most like? Peter, the courageous one, the one who experienced the power and the presence of Jesus, the one who showed courage and daring, the one who trusted? Or are you more like the other 11? Are you a water walker or a boat dweller? I love the Ian White song which says, "A ship that's in the harbour is still and safe from harm, but it was not built to be there. It was made for wind and storm." And throughout my life, there have been those occasions when the Lord has invited me to get out of my boat, but I preferred the relative safety of the boat compared to the waves. And one of the scariest happened just a few years after Julie and I were married. Up to that point, it would probably be true to say that we enjoyed the safety of the harbour, protected, sheltered, safe, secure, spiritually comfortable. But to extend this metaphor, we knew that God was calling us to experience life of the open seas. We believed that God had created and called us for more than we had experienced at that time. Now, many of you know our story, and I'm a little bit reticent to talk about it again, but as a young couple, we weren't wealthy, just normal early 20-somethings. I was working 2 jobs to make ends meet to provide for our young family, but we were secure. We came to believe that I should train in theological college for full-time ministry, which meant giving up my jobs, selling our mid-terrace 2-bedroom home, and moving away from family ties with our then 2 children. That was a much bigger deal for Julie than it was for me. And the worst of all was the thought of emigrating to England, missionaries in a foreign land. For months before leaving, Julie and I had major doubts that we were doing the right thing, for our known income only covered half of our known expenditure for the next 12 months. We asked ourselves many times if we were being obedient to Jesus or if we were just being reckless. It's not always easy to discern which is which. Were we being fools for Christ or just being foolhardy? So we wanted to do the right thing by God, but we were also responsible parents and didn't want to put our children in jeopardy. Yet now, some 40 years on, with the benefit of hindsight, I can say that that one act of bold faith, of getting out of the boat, has set the tone for the rest of our lives so far. Everything since 1984 has been coloured by that decision to be obedient to God. No regrets. No regrets. Getting out of our personal boats can be scary. I used to be petrified of speaking in public, which incidentally is most people's number one fear, even ahead of death, believe it or not, which supposedly is number 3 on the list. American comedian Jerry Seinfeld pointed out that according to this logic, it appears that most people at a funeral service would rather be the person in the coffin than the person who has to stand up to give a eulogy. One of my all-time favourite actors is Robin Williams. The guy was so versatile, so funny. I especially loved his performances as Mrs. Doubtfire and as John Keating, poetry professor in Dead Poets Society, who inspires his students at the Welton Academy to have a love for poetry. There's a famous scene from the film of John Keating and his students standing in the magnificent hallway of the academy, and John is inspiring his class of boys to live extraordinary lives. Pointing up to some old photographs of past students, he says to his present students, "They're not that different from you, are they? Same haircuts, full of hormones, just like you, invincible, just like you feel. The world is their oyster. They believe they're destined for great things, just like many of you. Their eyes are full of hope, just like you. Did they wait until it was too late to make from their lives even one iota of what they were capable? Because you see, gentlemen, these boys are now fertilizing daffodils, but if you listen real close, you can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in, rather bemuse they listen to their teacher and they do what he is telling them. They lean in. Listen, do you hear it?" Then Robin Williams, in a rather eerie voice, says, "Carpe, do you hear it?" And the boys were now looking even more perplexed. Carpe, carpe diem. Seize the day, boys. Make your lives extraordinary. Well, I thought it was an absolutely brilliant film. Superb acting. That's Robin Williams', not mine. Great message. Carpe diem, which is seize the day in Latin. And Peter, on that stormy night, seized the day, the opportunity. He dared to trust in Jesus. I bought a book on the internet some time ago. No surprise there. It was supposedly a New York Times bestseller, though I'm not sure why. Its title was what grabbed my attention. 1 month to live. And its focus was just that. What would you change in your life if you had only 1 month to live? The inside cover of the book stated, "Are you suffering from someday syndrome? Always waiting for someday? When your schedule calms down, when your finances improve, when your kids grow up, so that you can begin to live the life you've always dreamed of? Consider how your perspective would change if you had just 30 days to live. After the initial shock, you'd probably squeeze all you could from the days that remain. You'd say what you really think. You'd love with abandon. You'd focus on what you care about most. In short, you'd stop wasting precious time, and in whatever time you had left, you'd throw yourself into becoming the person that God intended you to be." Well, St. Paul shares a similar message in Ephesians chapter 5. He says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity." In the UK in 1992, for the first time, a new legal requirement was implemented in all workspaces. Risk assessments. Risk assessments help us identify what hazards exist in the workplace and the need to take steps to minimize harm. Most of it's common sense, I would say, but overall I think it's a good thing. I wonder what risk assessments would have looked like on fishing boats in the time of Jesus. Don't walk on wet surfaces. Don't lean out of your boat, especially on windy conditions. Under no circumstances are you to enter the water after dark or without a life jacket. Someone once said that faith can also be spelled R-I-S-K. There's always a risk in getting out of the boat. But then again, when you think of it, there's a risk staying in the boat too. Boat dwellers risk remaining unfulfilled on their spiritual journey. They risk not growing in their faith. They risk stagnating. They risk unrealized potential. They risk unfulfilled longings. They risk a life of mediocrity. I love the words of an author named Eileen Gooder, who brings out this idea of risk. She says, "You can live on bland food so as to avoid an ulcer. Drink no tea, coffee, or other stimulants in the name of health. Go to bed early. Stay away from nightlife. Avoid the controversial subjects so as to never give offense. Mind your own business. Avoid involvement in other people's problems. Spend money only on necessities and save all you can." Then she continues, "You can still break your neck in the bathtub, and it'll serve you right." I suppose the $1 million question is, did Peter fail? Well, in a way he did. Jesus said so. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" His faith wasn't strong enough. His doubts were stronger. He saw the wind. He took his eyes off where they should have been. He sank. He failed. But I think there were 11 bigger failures sitting in the boat. They failed quietly. Their failure went unnoticed, unobserved, uncriticized. Only Peter knew the shame of public failure. But then again, only Peter knew the glory of walking on water. Only Peter knew what it was like to attempt to do what he knew was humanly impossible. Only Peter dared to trust Jesus. Only Peter knew the feelings of euphoria, of God's empowering presence. You see, the worst failure is not to sink in the waves. The worst failure is to never get out of the boat in the first place. And Peter's willingness to risk failure, I believe, also helped him to grow as a disciple of Jesus. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine for polio that finally worked, but only after 200 unsuccessful attempts. One day he was asked, "How did it feel to fail 200 times? He responded, "I didn't fail 200 times. I just discovered 200 ways how not to vaccinate for polio." I also love the story of Sir Edmund Hillary, who made many unsuccessful attempts at scaling Mount Everest before he finally succeeded. After one attempt, it was reported that he stood at the base of the mountain and shook his fist at it, saying, "I'll defeat you yet, because you're as big as you're going to be, and I'm still growing." Indeed, each time he climbed and failed, he learned new lessons until the day when he didn't fail. The New Testament records many of Peter's failures, but we also read of many of the times that he succeeded. As we are willing to get out of the boat and face our fears and dare to trust in Jesus, we grow as followers of Christ. Well, let me come into land. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. But what is your boat? Maybe for some of you, your boat may be that decision to follow Jesus. Jesus invites you to come to him personally, but you might have become all very comfortable in being around Christian people attending church services, but have so far resisted taking that step of faith in Jesus for yourself. For others, you might find security in your bank account or finances, and to give away what you've earned, to have a generous heart to share with people in need, to support the work of your church, all feels a little bit risky to you. Up to this point, you've chosen the apparent security of being a boat dweller rather than a water walker. Then there are those who, through their own insecurities and feelings of vulnerability, never offer themselves to serve the purposes of God through one of their church's ministries. And my advice to you is to start somewhere. Find a ministry opportunity where you can serve. Speak to various ministry leaders, children, youth, elderly, one of the community-based projects that we have with Tamworth Elim Church. Dare to get out of the boat. For some, getting out of the boat will mean sharing their faith with a workmate or a neighbour. They might know all about you being a churchgoer, but you've always backed off from having a true faith conversation with them, sharing your testimony. Maybe a first simple step of getting out of the boat will be to invite that person to the next Alpha course or invite them to a Christmas service. For some people, the challenge of getting out of the boat is to offer forgiveness to that person who has done you so much harm. You know that it is the right thing to do, but many find it so hard to get out of the boat named unforgiveness. And yet offering forgiveness can bring about such a significant spiritual breakthrough. And I'm sure that there are many other ways too, in which we might be challenged to get out of our own personal boats. In the Gospel of Mark, we are given a detail that is not included in Matthew's telling of this story. Mark tells us of Jesus that he was about to pass them by. I find that a little bit of a strange comment. I'm not really sure why Mark includes it, but maybe Mark is telling us that there are those occasions when Jesus is near, when his presence is tangible, yet we miss him because at heart we are boat dwellers, not water walkers. Someone rather creatively summed it up this way: I would like to buy $3 worth of God, please. Not enough to explode my soul or disturb my sleep, but just enough of him to equal a cup of warm milk or snooze in the sunshine. I don't want enough of him to make me love a beggar, forgive someone who hurt me, or give away my wealth. I want ecstasy, not transformation. I want the warmth of the womb, not the new birth. I would like to buy $3 worth of God, please. If you want to walk on water, then you better get out of the boat.